Welcome back to the Prepare Like a Pro live chat show. My name is Jack McLean. I'm the host, and tonight my guest is Tim Parham. He is the head physio at the Adelaide Football Club and has worked at a large range of elite sporting teams such as Arsenal, Port Adelaide, and the GWS Giants. Before we start tonight's episode, our mission here at Prepare Like a Pro is to empower aspiring athletes and staff with practical knowledge from some of the industry's most inspiring individuals and to strengthen the AFL community. If you like the show, please show support by following us on Instagram and subscribing to the podcast. We're on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. Thanks for jumping on, Tim.
Not a problem. No, it's fantastic to jump on and be part of it. I've sort of watched from afar and seen some pretty good guests. So pretty humbled to be invited.
No, thanks, mate. We're very lucky to have you on. We'll dive right at the beginning, mate. Take us back. At what age did you discover you had a passion for physiotherapy?
Yeah, I suppose it's a pretty interesting sort of story. If you're that way inclined, I started studying sort of sports science, human movement, and absolutely loved that, and always wanted to do that sort of through high school. And the whole idea about physiotherapy never really dawned on me. I sort of always had visions of going into PE teaching and being pretty active in that space. Like I think most people that study sports science, PE was my favourite subject through school and into year 12.
Yep.
And then on the back of that, I sort of graduated, and a small way into teaching, I sort of realised that it actually probably wasn't for me. It also coincided with a time where I was playing football, albeit amateur football, quite badly, and copped a few injuries and got to actually build up a pretty good relationship with a physio, guy by the name of Scott Smith in Adelaide, who's pretty well regarded. Yeah, and he was sort of my treating physio, and I'd sort of got to him after probably a long line of physios, and he probably opened my eyes up to the scope to be able to delve more into the rehab space and actually lean on some of my frustrations, which were as an injured sort of amateur athlete, was I was frustrated with physio saying, no, you can't do this, and no, you can't do that, and you shouldn't be doing this, and this real sort of cotton wool approach to injury management, albeit at a very, very amateur level. But I suppose Scotty opened my eyes to what was perhaps possible, and I'm sort of giving my age away a little bit now, but when I graduated sports science, there wasn't the master's courses available. So I went and did a bachelor, the full bachelor of physio degree on the back of my sports science degree. And I did have a sort of an altered or a modified load, which was awesome in a way, because I could still work in that sort of strength and conditioning space while I was studying. So it meant that I could have a really strong sort of S&C lens on what I was learning in the physio world. And then I suppose as I sort of graduated, that it sort of solidified in my mind where I wanted to take it.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things to unpack there. So you mentioned Scott. So what was his philosophy, and how did it differ from those that were frustrating you, that cotton wool approach? What was Scott focusing on with your rehabilitation? How did it sort of differ?
Yeah, I think first thing for me was just the interpersonal relationship I had with him. Fantastic practitioner, but a really good bloke. And he actually became a mentor of mine across, or still is. We still chat. But also he was able to sort of give me some home truths in a sense that you need to get stronger. You need to do this, you need to do that. But equal to that, it's like, hey, hold on. Just because I was rehabbing a groin injury initially, and he was very much sort of saying, look, just because you've got this groin injury, it doesn't mean that you can't be training the house down, doing non-weight bearing conditioning, gym work, you can. It sort of just opened up a whole, I suppose, avenue towards that rehab.
Focus on the things you can do and still attack them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of my frustrations with physios, and I don't want to bash physios, but a lot of physios will default to the safest option a lot of the time, and
Sure.
And I think in many instances you're actually doing the athlete or the client a bit of a disservice. And I think that's one of the things I really liked about Scotty was some pretty clear objectives and some some good honest home truths, I suppose.
Yeah, and that's interesting. So you started in the sports science realm, and you mentioned you were doing some strength and conditioning work while doing your bachelor's of physio. What did that look like? Was that in a Globo gym? Was that a like semi-professional sport? What type of experience was it?
Yeah, look, anything and everything. Dabbled in a little bit of institute stuff here in Adelaide. Worked at a public gym, which I think is great. Personal training. And then also probably most significantly, I was working for the SRNFL here in South Australia with the sort of elite academy, primarily the under 18 sort of pathways, and that gave me a great insight into that sort of semi-elite football environment.
And so it sounds like you had a feeling to or a passion and motivation to work in elite sport. Was that the goal when you started sports science during the conditioning, and then with physio as well? The end goal was to work in high performance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that was pretty clear in my mind. I after finishing my physio degree, I was really lucky again. I had a graduate training position at one of the sort of public hospitals, and that was great in terms of cutting my teeth in the true physio world. But I knew sort of after 12 months I wanted to get into, initially some private practice, and I actually ended up working for Scott in his practice here in Adelaide. And through that, I got some good exposure, some real sink or swim moments with Sturt Football Club in the SRNFL. I did that for 3 years. Looked after a netball team for a couple of years in the South Australian Netball Association. Some stuff with Tennis Australia, Australian lacrosse. So it was a real dip your toe in the water in terms of that sort of semi-elite and elite sport.
Yeah. And how did you gather those opportunities when you had going from someone that was studying and doing a bit of work here and there? How did you build it? Was it speaking to Scott and he would hook up with some networks, or was it emailing people? Was it what was your strategy? And I guess for physios and strength and conditioning coaches listening in that are trying to get some experience and maybe they've had a few setbacks, what would be a recommendation to try and get the foot in the door?
Yeah, look, I think I did sort of I wore multiple. I sort of did multiple roles, especially with the SRNFL stuff, from game day runner to working in some game development stuff to working with the rehab lads, doing some conditioning work and those sorts of things. But I think beyond that sort of idea of just getting stuck into whatever's sort of thrown at you, I think probably going in with a mindset that I don't know everything. I've got some ideas, but just trying to pick up, bits and pieces here and there, chat to people. I was always pretty amazed at how forthcoming people were when you approach them directly, and be that via, social media platforms or text or something like that. Generally it's more about just being proactive in that space and trying to start those conversations and get the ball rolling. And we do work in a big industry, but it is a small industry at the same time. It is pretty tight knit, and it's very rare that someone actually will shut a door on you, I found. So I really tried to lean in on that as a general sort of philosophy. And then also I think the other thing was just building good relationships with people, like investing the time in some of the athletes. And I'm probably going down a bit of a rabbit hole here, but I remember one of the guys that has become a really good mate of mine, the guy Jack Homsch, who played at GWS and Port Adelaide and just finished up at the Gold Coast Suns. We worked together with the under 18 state team. We worked at Sturt Football Club. He lobs up to GWS. I follow him. I came down to Port. He was there. And interestingly enough, now he's at the Crows as a development coach. So, some of those things that you sort of, it's easy to take for granted at the time, but just building on those good relationships and leaning on the people sort of, in the industry and probably getting to know them, more at a human level, more than anything. I think, yeah, it's been really important.
Yeah, that's such great advice. There's heaps of gems there. So getting involved in any way that you can. So it wouldn't be typical for um, a physio to be game day runner. But that goes to show your mindset of putting yourself in that position. What were you trainer at that stage, working up to physio role, or you were the game day physio and runner? Like, how did that work?
I think my involvement with the SNFL spanned about 6 years. So I think I wore most hats at different points in time, anywhere from, sort of fitness coach, runner, working with the rehab guys.
You're working in the strength.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So, to that end, I think, I sort of did everything and anything, which was great. It was great grounding. So
Yeah. And you mentioned building the networks and and not just from a networking point of view, but actually developing the relationship and from a personal point of view. Is that something that's come naturally to you, or is that something that a mentor is giving you feedback on and you've worked on that skill set? Or is it something that's just more that you've always valued?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think I've always intuitively valued it. I'm a person that I love my mates, and I feel like I'm a good mate. But equal to that, I just I think how lucky I've got friends that work jobs that they're dissatisfied with, and they don't get a buzz out of the day to day, and so it's probably having some gratitude for the in those moments where where it is a bit of a grind, and just reflecting on sort of how lucky you are in certain instances. So that's probably been a big part of it. Yeah. In terms of sort of having feedback in that regard, not specifically, but it is something that gathers a bit of momentum in terms of that challenge of trying to get to know someone and trying to work out what makes them tick, especially at a rehab sort of level. I think if you invest your time and energy into that, then the rest sort of it's almost like follow the bouncing ball to some extent.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned Scott Smith. There are some other people that have been significant in your development early days.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, to some end, you'd like to think you pick up snippets from everyone, good, bad, or indifferent. And like I said earlier, I don't know it all, and I definitely don't pretend I do. So I think that's probably a big part of just absorbing as much information from as many practitioners and coaches as possible. For me, the GWS was my first sort of foray into full-time sport. So Mark Williams was a fantastic sort of sounding board for me. Obviously an ex-Port Adelaide coach, just a brilliant person, challenging, ruthless at times, but a great carer. And I really lean on some of the stuff that Choco, I suppose taught me, especially in those early years at GWS. John Quinn, who was our high performance manager at the Giants, was fantastic. Again, very challenging. He high expectations, set a standard, had exceptional reputation within the industry. Was someone that I definitely butted heads with at times, and would laugh about it now, but drove really good standards. And then I suppose the bigger picture, I really loved my time at Port Adelaide. I ended up at Port Adelaide through Darren Burgess, and he probably solidified a lot of my sort of philosophical approaches to rehab and injury management, and maybe taking more of a performance lens on managing players. And so he's been a huge influence on me. But then also, I'd have to say that the staff I worked with at Port Adelaide were fantastic. It was a really good high performance medical team. Mark Fisher, who's an Olympic team doctor, Damien Newbury, Tim O'Leary, who's had some NBA experience and been at the helm for a long time, Mike Heinen, Ian McEwen, Stuart Graham, really good practitioners. And I suppose the beauty of my time there was the fact that we would jump into a room and literally bang heads and have pretty robust discussions, and at times get a bit heated. We'd walk out of the meeting, and 10 minutes later, we're all, laughing and joking about it. And we all genuinely had the best intentions for the players. And so that was a really rare sort of working environment for me. So, that was a really influential sort of period for me in terms of just developing the craft and being more critical of how and what you're doing.
Yeah.
And then I suppose that the trip to the UK, like there were so many great people, but some standouts for me is, our head physiotherapist, a guy by the name of Chris Morgan, who's now the head physio at Liverpool, unbelievably well credentialed physio, had been in the Premier League and still is for 15 years. Fantastic. Yeah, but has seen it all, warts and all, level-headed, but really good, solid skill set. Some, really honed in on the sort of fundamentals. And for me, as an outsider coming into the sport, was great at being, just a sounding board for different ideas. So I owe a lot of credit to Chris. We still chat a lot at a personal and professional level. And then probably another couple of standouts for me was Tom Allen. He's a fantastic he's the head of sports science at Arsenal. Brilliant mind, but would break down the complicated and make it simple, which I found super impressive. And an S&C coach by the name of Sam Wilson. He and I worked together really well. He ran a lot of our on-pitch rehab. He's a licensed coach. So in terms of the craft and the subtleties of football or soccer, he was brilliant in being able to educate and just hone in on some of the attention to detail stuff, especially on the pitch. He was a massive influence.
Yeah, it's thanks, mate. Thanks for sharing that. And there's an amazing that's a pretty elite list that I've written down there of people that you've worked with, which is a testament to yourself that you've worked in those places and been involved with those. But the challenging each other and the care seems to be something that the open and honest conversations is something that's popped up throughout, and the importance of relationships. So if we go into that, like the heated conversations, how does that develop? How does a team get to that level of the ability that they can butt heads, get heated, and then leave it all out there, because it's all about caring for the players and not get emotional and caught up in that? Like, is that through repetition and practice? Does it take? Do you believe all high performance teams can get to that point, or do you need a certain amount of different types of personalities to get there?
Yeah, look, I'm not sure. I mean, it's been a bit of a developing interest of mine, is that sort of performance psychology and what makes a high performing team. I think if you have the answer, you'd be very wealthy. I think probably the big thing for me is having the personalities in the room that, however you get to that point, are willing to be, to lay your work bare a little bit, and sort of embrace that transparency in a way. And some of the advice I give to sort of young physios, young coaches is just, it's hard, but make yourself available, but also, allow people to critique what you're doing. And I think equal to that is, if someone does critique what you're doing and how you're doing it, make sure that they come with a solution as well. So I think often in high performance environments, and especially in the trenches, when you're mid-season, you've had a run of injuries, say, or a run of losses, it can become a pretty high pressure environment. There's the volatility in elite sport, which is always, you've always sort of got half an eye over your shoulder as to what's going on, job-wise, job security, and that sort of stuff. But I think that's really important, that in those key moments is that you kind of got each other's back, and you are able to sort of open yourself up and be productive in that space, which is bloody hard, and it's a challenge, and you've got to have that right mix of people, and there is something to be said for just the amount of time that you actually spend with each other, and that was one thing that was abundantly clear at Port when I'd come down, that you're a doctor and a physio that'd been there a long time, and we're all very tight knit group socially as well. But yeah, I think that's part of it as well, is just having that trust and having that time in the trenches with each other is really important, and it's really hard to just accelerate, or it often doesn't happen quickly. But I think the other thing as well is, as tough as things can be, and we talk about the run of injuries or run of losses or whatever that is, trying to actually make it a fun environment. I think people, this is an industry, and I'm not sort of preaching to the converted. I'm sure there's people listening. There's a lot of ego. There's a lot of it become a bit of a turf war at various points, but ultimately we're all in it because it's a high energy environment, and we want to get something out of it, and it should be reciprocated. You're in the environment because it is high energy, but that should give you energy as well in your day to day.
Yep. Yeah, awesome, mate. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And there's been a couple of key, I guess, trends amongst experienced practitioners in elite sport, and the importance of not just staying at one club and staying within one sport. And looking at your experience, you've definitely done that. You've worked in different sports and across a varied elite clubs. Was that deliberate and intentional early days? Like when you're at GWS, did you think I'm going to be here for 10 years, or did you think I'm not going to get comfortable here, I'm going to move, and when I get the opportunity to jump, I'm going to take it? And that was, or was that just something that eventuated, to come?
Yeah, it's something that eventuated. I've never really had you always have these sort of ambitions and that sort of stuff. I loved my time at GWS, and we, even thinking back on it now, as hard as some of those early years were in establishing a new club, trekking out to Blacktown and stuff, we had some great practitioners and some great people involved in the club in those early stages. Lockie Wilmot, stack of great coaches, Nick Walsh, who's now sort of high performance manager at St Kilda. So looking back on that sort of stuff, like we never really, or I personally never really thought, oh, look, I'm here for a couple of years and I'm going to shoot home. Yep. It was just more about opportunity and timing, and the decision to come home was probably when I say home, coming back to Adelaide was more of a decision around family, and just being married and eyeing off having a family and so forth, and then equal to that, I suppose Darren Burgess offered a role or pitched a role which was quite appealing and was sort of spoke a little bit to my core values, and we found that we're pretty early on we're fairly philosophically aligned, and I suppose the time at Port Adelaide was a great ride in a sense, because you're going from GWS, which is very much a young club with a very young playing list, and everything's new, and some of my fondest memories and strongest relationships I have are from those early GWS days, because we're all sort of thrust together, and not many of us were from Sydney. We're all from Adelaide, Melbourne, Perth, Northern Territory, your sort of true football states. But yeah, again, some of those really great memories have stemmed from that, and it's only probably in the fullness of time you look back and you think, far out, that was awesome. What we were doing, as brutal as it was at the time. And then the shift to Port Adelaide, by contrast, was a very old club, established, very some core values. It has its roots within the community. Great history in Adelaide, and then equal to that in the impactful in the AFL, and at that point in time it was on the rise. Just that move to Adelaide Oval, and I think they just missed out on a grand final by a kick, and there was a real energy and a buzz around the football club, and absolutely loved my time there. And then I suppose that the opportunity to move to the UK was one that probably started as a bit of a joke. Darren got the role at Arsenal, and I think I was probably one of quite a few people that sort of jokingly said, "Mate, I'll carry your bags for you. Whatever you need, I'm there." and it wasn't sort of until sort of 6 months later that, once Darren was on the ground and could see the lie of the land, that, a role sort of presented itself. So, I interviewed for a role there, and then ultimately it became one of those things. I had a young family at the time. I had a 1-year-old, and I was just like, to my wife, Marcella, I was like, we'd kick ourselves if we don't do it. We'd regret it. We can't, there's too many pros and not enough cons. And it all happened
with the 1-year-old.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it was, in hindsight, it was, we had some tough moments, as you know, with a young family yourself. But like that, it almost became a non-decision in a way, because the opportunity was too good to pass up. Yeah. So, and as a family and as a person, we learned so much about each other and ourselves, and great experience.
Yeah. And you mentioned Darren Burgess and yourself you worked out you had similar core values and philosophy. Am I mistaken? You guys hadn't worked together until Port Adelaide?
No, we'd never actually met each other. So,
no.
Was
that through reputation, through other players that have said things, or other practitioners that have mentioned things?
I don't know exactly, but I think it was probably more along the line. Like, I knew some of the staff at Port Adelaide, some of the physios that I'd worked with, through those sort of SNFL circles and especially Sturt Football Club. So there was some connection there. So I think also being from Adelaide probably helped my cause a little bit. I'm not sort of naive to that fact. And it was something that I think it started, we're just having phone calls and talking about and around stuff, and it just sort of grew legs over a period of time. And
And what was Arsenal like when you started settling in and working in that? How different is it to football in terms of the medical performance side of things?
Yeah, like, unbelievably, very different. I suppose the first thing for me, which I underestimated, was just the enormity of the club and the brand, and the fabric of a big Premier League club. And it's not kind of until I was on the ground that I got a real appreciation for that. So that was probably the first thing.
What like, how, for someone that hasn't felt that, what is it, the fans? Is it the stadium, the facilities? I mean, I'm sure it's a lot of things, but what are the things to try and get a visual of that feeling of the substance that is going on there?
Yeah, I suppose it's hard to pinpoint exactly, but I remember when I first got on the ground in London, and I've been hit up by bloggers and journalists and all this sort of stuff, and I hadn't even set foot in the club, and and then I suppose once you're physically on the ground there, you look in the players' car park, and I think most of the guys, the daily drive was a Range Rover or a G-Wagon, and then on special days you see the Ferraris and Lamborghinis. So there were sort of those sort of pinch yourself moments, and there's time you rock up for work, and your kit's being laid out for you, and you head upstairs and have breakfast because the chef's cooked buffet breakfast, and you have the same again at lunch, and then I suppose just the dynamic of the playing group was something just completely unique. I think in my first year at Arsenal, out of our squad of 25 athletes, we had 14 different nationalities. So coming from AFL, where it's pretty homogenous, really. Like if you or I walked into North Melbourne Footy Club or Hawthorn or Fremantle, there would be some similarities. There'd be a lot of similarities, and not too many differences. It'd be pretty same. I suppose the thing in football or soccer is it's a fairly polarizing sport. It's obviously a global sport, and with that comes, obviously different languages being spoken, but then also different philosophies around preparation, training, what the schedule looks like, what you eat, how you recover, how you rehab an injury. So that was a real, sort of pinch yourself moment, I suppose. Was like, wow, this is big. Yeah, and then in terms of our sort of high performance medical staff, it came at a period of time like of immense change for the club, and I'm not sure if you or your sort of listeners or viewers are Premier League followers, but us and Wenger, had been there 22 years, and so it was a period of immense change and for the club, and with that, there came a lot of staff changes, and I was one of 7 new sort of performance / medical staff coming in.
How many Australians were part of the team?
Well, interestingly enough, in our sort of high performance medical, I think we had 7 nationalities.
Wow.
Yeah, so that alone, I mean, we had a Portuguese physio, a Russian data scientist. We had an Irish strength and conditioning coach, an American conditioning coach, myself, a Japanese osteopath. So it was a real melting pot of ideas and that. So I did a presentation over in the UK, and I think one of my opening slides was like, we had a team building day where the players and everyone in the football department, we went paintballing, and as a gesture from the club, on our uniforms we had to wear the flags of where we were from, and we had a photo at the end, and it's just amazing to see just how many different flags there were being represented within that sort of that football department. So that was probably those sort of I suppose observations with ones like, wow, this is this is a beast.
That really does that. Yeah, it helps to have that understanding of context, and it definitely paints a picture, that whole experience. I mean, from having bloggers interviewing you, and then like you said, the wealth around the club and the level of detail and care going into presenting your uniform and all that sort of thing. It's a unique experience and definitely a special one.
Sure.
It's amazing. And what about as a performance squad? We were talking about meetings before and having that high performance synergy and being able to go toe to toe, but also care, and be on the same page. Were meetings done differently? How did you guys sort of build that synergy and spend time together?
Yeah, look, I think, to be honest, only those early stages, because it was a period of immense change for the club as a whole. We had a new manager come in, Unai Emery, very well credentialed manager in his own right, unbelievably dedicated, intelligent operator, and his record speaks for himself. So understanding sort of the coaching staff was, and their philosophies and their approach to the day-to-day became a really important part of it. Again, when you have such a prominent figure like us, and 22 years in the game, that leaves a massive sort of indelible sort of footprint on the club, and being able to,
with him. Is that why there was a lot of change, or did they just leave because Arsene was gone?
Yes, a combination of things. Yeah, there's a bit of a mass turnover. I think at some level the club probably saw that as an opportunity for a bit of a restructure. And I suppose that continued a little bit within that sort of high performance medical space. There was some physios that have been there 14, 15 years, 20 plus years as well. So that's obviously a challenge in a sort of high performance medical sense, is coming in after, pretty well established, practitioners and coaches. And then trying to forge, your own way of doing things and understanding the guys around you and what everyone's about and what their one wood looks like and how it all sort of works together. So that was some of the early challenges that we faced, definitely.
Yeah. And you mentioned the rehab, how there was different philosophy amongst practitioners and players. So how did you go about building buy-in within your own cohort of staff and then players as well?
Yeah, it's good. It's a good question, and something I probably handed up, probably went in a bit gung ho. I suppose some good advice to me was, because I had come from outside of football or soccer, was to actually lean on that. And again, as sort of mentioned earlier, that football was one of those sports where we had World Cup winners, Champions League winners in our squad, and they're very sort of strong opinions on how things should run. But also they have trophies to their name. I think we had Petr Cech at one stage who had 17 sort of trophies to his name, and he's a big time player. So I think he spoke 7 languages and had some strong ideas about this is how to rehab a hamstring. This is how to recover from a game, and this is what we should be doing in training. Sorry,
was that when he was dealing with a hammy rehab, or when another player?
Yeah, it was actually. Yeah, it was there. But equal to that, I mean, I remember one of my first sort of occasions. We had a Spanish player who was a ex-international, and he strained his hamstring. He was a 33-year-old wingback, and it was his first ever soft tissue injury.
Oh, wow.
And I remember quite vividly, I went in to sort of chat to him and start to map out a bit of a rehab plan for him, because my role was as rehab coordinator was to try and bring all the pieces together and, make sure there was some unity between strength and conditioning, sports science, physiotherapy, medical, and sort of oversee that process. And to some extent, sort of avoid that conveyor belt that, I think a lot of teams and clubs get sucked into doing, and ultimately sort of bringing everyone on the same page from day one of an injury. And I remember chatting to this player, and I said, look, how do you want to, manage this? Because one of my big things is, it's no use designing the best rehab plan in the world if you haven't run it past the athlete themselves. So, generally one of my first ports of call was to go to the athlete and say, how, even though you've never done a soft tissue injury, how do you feel that this should be rehabbed? And with a straight face, his answer to me was, look, I'm flying out tomorrow. I'm going back to Pamplona. I'm going to have 14 days in the sun. I'll get some red wine and some good food, and then I'll be back and I'll train. And, this is a guy who, had probably never set foot in the gym, was very anti-gym. And, the whole concept of sort of strength and conditioning and, hamstring rehab continuums all of a sudden, flies out the window. So, and then interestingly, probably 2 weeks later, we had a guy sort of do a low-grade hamstring on a game day on a Saturday, and he was Swiss. And I don't want to generalise in terms of nationalities and those sorts of things, but this was a Saturday afternoon. He strained his hamstring, and Saturday night about 10 o'clock, he sent me a message and he said, I'll see you at the club tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. We start working twice a day, every day until I'm back. I said, whoa, hold on. So that's sort of one extreme to the other, but they're all sitting next to each other in the same dressing room. So
that's amazing.
I suppose, so for me, it was a little bit of like, well, how do you package up your rehab to, get the maximum buy-in from the athlete? And incredibly challenging at times, don't get me wrong. But I suppose, again, coming from outside of football with no football pedigree, and, to be honest, the Aussies, we get laughed at a little bit in a football sense. But one thing we do, stack up pretty well with is our physicality and our sports science, sports medicine practitioners across the world are pretty well regarded. So, interestingly, a lot of the players have come across Aussies in their clubs or junior grades or in their travels, which probably I sort of piggybacked on the back of that a little bit. So
that's awesome to hear that. We're involved at that level. It's pretty impressive for a country of our size and the amount of people we have, and we're stacking up in that world level, particularly. In EPL, it doesn't get much bigger. So, that's amazing. What did you end up doing with the 33-year-old Spanish player? Did he end up going on his trip?
I think we brokered a bit of a deal. I think he went away for 4 days and then came back. And we went to all sorts of measures to try and strategy to try and get him engaged in some strength work and that sort of stuff. And some of it was a little bit via stealth. We take the kettlebells out and leave them pitch side and take a barbell out and almost trick him into doing some eccentric strength load, albeit pitch side at various points. So it was just trying to find different ways to skin the cat, so to speak.
Yeah, and that method of asking the player first as your first interaction into rehab, how did you come up with that? Is that something that you've done for a while as a mentor, or have you seen someone else do that and you've sort of taken it on, or take us through that process?
Yeah, to be brutally honest, I probably learnt the hard way. I think back to some of my early sort of GWS days, and a couple of players there. I'm sure they don't mind me saying that Phil Davis was a guy that we go back, we're great friends, and but early days, his, I suppose, questioning of me was, you haven't asked me once what I think about any of this. And Phil's a great operator. You're probably aware of some of his work, podcasts and in the media and that sort of stuff. He's an astute, intelligent guy. And, I was probably, at the front end of my sort of career in a full-time sense, working in elite sport. And it's something I never really, you're a bit headstrong and you've got a healthy ego and that sort of stuff. And, that was probably the wake-up call I needed from someone like that, to say, hey, hold on, like, what are you on about? Like, you haven't even once talked to me about what you've got planned. Like, where do you think that sits with me? So that was a good wake-up call. And, Phil and I, we joke about some of those early sort of robust discussions. And in a similar vein, like, Chad Corns was, he had the back end of his career at GWS and we've become really good friends. But there were moments there where similar sort of thing. He's like, look, you've not once sort of challenged me as to what I feel like I need. And so that's just, when it comes from the athlete, that's, can't get any more sort of influential than that, really.
100%. No, thank you for sharing that. That's great advice. That speaks to volumes on what you said before, that you've learned from everyone that you've been, that you've worked with, and that goes to show that it's not just learning off people in your trade, but also the players that you work from. You can get a lot out of that, and thanks, mate. Really appreciate that. It's awesome. And then, what about on the players' point of view? Is you've worked with the top tier players in the AFL, but also world athletes in English Premier League. Are there a common mindset and way about the athletes that are high performers from a consistency point of view, and that developing athletes can aspire to work towards?
Yeah, that's a good question. I suppose one of the privileges that I've had in my experience is in rehab. It's a tough time for athletes. Their identity in a certain sense is lost for that period. And I think the guys that this whole idea of resilience and robustness, I think those sort of words get thrown around a bit too liberally at times. But I think, in all honesty, like the guys who, one of the common themes that I've seen across really good athletes is that ability just to deal with adversity. And in that rehab space, I suppose that takes the form of, often it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's never linear. It's never exponential. So I suppose the guys that have that ability to sort of cope, mentally and physically, with that, that adversity and that sort of non-linear rehab pathway, I think is really, really good.
Yeah.
And then I sort of, some of the great athletes that I've worked with, I think there's a sense that they're very humble. That's also, a big part of their makeup. But ultimately, they're hard workers and they have work ethic, and they'll front up and they'll grind and embrace the grind at various points. And, I think you can sort of tiptoe around it a little bit, but, the great athletes work the hardest, more often than not. And, off the top of my head, I point to someone like Travis Boak, and, unbelievable privilege to be able to sort of work alongside someone like Trav, because, he in a positive way, will question everything he's doing and be really fastidious about his preparation, his training, his recovery, those sorts of things. But is always looking for the next, 1% or 2%, and has some confidence in the fact that he's done, he's done the big rocks across his week, and his preparation is spot on, and that's where he gets his confidence from. And seeing that sort of evolution of someone like Trav, I think that's that's super impressive, and that's probably a trait as well that a lot of the best athletes I've worked with sort of share, that ability to sort of keep reinventing and embrace new challenges, but and have that attention to detail.
Yeah, it's a good point you make there. Like the big rocks and ticking those off from your confidence point of view, but then not getting complacent, like still focusing on getting better. It's not like he's sort of just on maintenance mode. He's still working on those 1%ers all the time while not throwing the baby out with the bathwater and always just changing stuff all the time. It's a tough balance to get, isn't
it? Yeah, absolutely.
And is that something that he showed like from early stage and has always had that, or do you reckon developed that mindset?
I reckon it's. I think. Yeah, again, I'm probably not talking out of school when it comes to someone like Trav, but I think it's the mindset that has evolved over time, and I think he'd be one of the first people to admit that if he had his time again, he would do things differently. But it's that ability to recognise key moments and key opportunities for change, which I think sets him apart from a lot of others.
Yeah, and what about yourself personally? What has been one of your biggest challenges that you've faced, and what did you learn from
it? I think, in all honesty, probably the move to the UK was a big one, with a young family and wife, and the unknown, going into what is a traditionally fairly volatile sort of industry, and again coming from outside of the sport. I think it's probably the hardest but best thing I've ever done in a professional sense. A lot of sort of sink or swim moments, and I think that's probably been one of the greatest, I suppose, challenges, but equally one of the most rewarding as well.
And was it like you mentioned, how you constantly in elite sport, one of the challenges is looking over your shoulder for job security? Was that twofold when you're in another country in the English Premier League, or was it similar to AFL?
No, look, there is an element of sort of job protection mode and looking over your shoulder and the volatility of the industry. I think some of that points a little bit to the structure, the way things are. It's a private ownership structure. Coaches come and go. I think it was probably Chris Morgan, said to me in early days, he said, look, this is a bit of a circus, and just remember, a manager's only 4 to 6 bad weeks away from getting the sack. So you sort of go in a little bit with eyes open, but it's not until you're on the ground that you realise that. And I think one of the great things in Australian sport, in a way, is especially my experience in AFL, is we really do embrace some of that, those robust sort of discussions and those sorts of things. And I think there was I think people when I was involved with football were probably a little bit more guarded, and there was a little bit of a period where everyone was just trying to suss each other out. We'd all sort of been, to a certain extent, thrown together within a short space of time, again in a period of sort of immense change. So it is, there's probably more at risk as well. You're halfway across the world. You don't really have a network. You don't really have a safety net either. So in that sense, it was there were some elements of this is we're on a knife's edge here. So, but I suppose that to some end made the highs really high as well. So
yep. And then when you came back to Australia, did you feel that that period over in the UK was a time where you really ingrained your philosophy, or is your philosophy something that you constantly sort of tweaking as your career progresses when it comes to
look, I'd like to think it's continually evolving. There's certainly been stuff I've brought back. I think the first thing, I probably don't take myself as seriously as I used to. I sort of understand what my one wood is, and I'm never going to be a brilliant clinician. I'm never going to be a brilliant diagnostic, clinician or manual therapist per se. I know where my strengths lie, and I probably feel more comfortable in that skill set. But then equal to that, I'm probably less resistant to embracing new ideas. And one of the things that I've sort of noticed coming back into AFL is its greatest strength is almost its greatest weakness. It's a pretty homogenous environment in many respects, and being able to sort of draw on some of those experiences, which initially I probably would have frowned at or probably didn't embrace completely. I've sort of found myself leaning on a little bit now back in Australia.
Yeah, and is it like working with those athletes that have come from different backgrounds and presented with different cases? Do you feel that you learn different ways of doing a hamstring rehab by seeing different methodologies and speaking to all these different types of people, or did it more just ingrained that your methods were something that you want to stick to, and it's more about actually just getting people to adhere to the philosophy or the methods, if that makes sense?
Yeah, look, it's probably sitting on the fence a little bit, but I think one of the big things that I have done well is, and I think a lot of young sort of strength and conditioning coaches and young physios, or anyone really working in the space, you almost have this urgency to do more and more and more. And what I suppose the football experience taught me was that you can actually do a lot with not much. For instance, if you've got a player that doesn't want to engage in the gym, then you've got to find a different way to sort of skin the cat, so to speak. So
Yep.
I've found that I haven't, I suppose, had the temptation to throw a million things at players, and probably, it's solidified, what the big rocks are and what I would like to lean on in a player's rehab and in their sort of strength and conditioning program. So that's probably the big thing. So it's that sense of sort of decluttering and having a better understanding of what your sort of key foundation or your big rocks are in a rehab.
Mm-hmm.
So and often, like I said, a lot of young coaches in my experience, and I've absolutely put my hand up and say I've been there, is like you want to throw everything at the athlete, and you just you almost get seduced with the opportunity to almost show off a little bit.
Yep.
But I suppose in time you realize that there is a lot of clutter in doing that, and sometimes just the simplicity is, it's very cliche, but simplicity is best.
Yep. And what about yourself? Like, what is one of your favourite ways to self-develop your own knowledge? Do you focus on, if you're taking a player through a hamstring rehabilitation, is that an area that you do more research on because it's specific to your role in that position, or like you mentioned, how high performance culture is something you're interested in at the moment? So will you read a book on that? Like, it's quite specific, or is it more just general in how you upskill yourself over your career?
Yeah, I suppose I've never really been strategic about it, but probably like yourself, like your offerings with social media, podcasts, Twitter, even that sort of thing. But probably the big thing is actually engaging with people, and I think I touched on it earlier that generally speaking, most people are pretty willing to pick up the phone or reply to an email, especially in AFL circles. We've got a great cohort, as of strength and conditioning coaches and physios that, you're only a phone call away. And so that's been, something that I've always tried to lean on a little bit. And I suppose it goes back to, what I said earlier about not knowing everything and actually sort of fronting up without all the answers. I think, is actually, a pretty positive thing in terms of being able to, engage with others and other professionals. In terms of like, what, I look at, I have had a more recent interest in that sort of, what makes a high performing team tick. be it, at a coaching level, at a playing level, at a high performance medical level. And that's a strong area of interest for me. But I would consume all sorts of podcasts and and the like, books, that sort of thing. So not any one thing, and nothing. There's no strategy surrounding it, I suppose. But
no, that makes sense. So it's sort of there's a you'll lean on people that have almost have experience and knowledge in that area, and then using podcast research to read and upskill yourself that way, and then that way you're going in informed, I guess, for those conversations. And it sounds like it's areas that are relevant to what you're currently doing or what you're currently interested in. But it doesn't need to be a set structure, so to speak. It's more in flow.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
And what about journaling and noting things down? Do you keep it informal, or are you someone that likes to note things down and have a document, so to process with it all?
Yeah, look, I've never sort of gone down the journal or the sort of self-reflection path per se. And I actually listened to a podcast, a high performance podcast with Dan Carter, and he was talking about the importance of his day-to-day journal and mapping out his day. Yep. But then that said, I suppose one of the things that I have, it's been a big part of my practice has been keeping good records. Being fairly sort of diligent with the planning, and keeping good records to reflect on. Because ultimately no two sort of rehabs are ever the same, and nor should they be. And we work in a time poor, so I suppose cutthroat industry, and if you've ever had a perfect rehab, then the chances are you're probably taken too long to get the player there. So a lot of that, is that reflection on some of your learnings, because every rehab is different. And so keeping good notes and documenting what you do, how you do it, what went well, where you stuffed up, those sort of things, I think are really important. And even this week, I pulled out a rehab plan of a player in 2011 that I worked on with GWS with a similar sort of injury, just to have a look at, what were some of the processes and sort of course of action that was taken then, but equal to that is just have a look at that evolution of how things have changed in 10 years and how I've changed my practice. So
and in that reporting, keeping your records process, so you've got the qualitative data, I imagine, and then what sort of quantitative stuff are you noting? Are you noting things like how the athlete is presenting from a mood point of view, or is it more screening information and sort of your subjective view on things? What do you think is important for practitioners to note during the rehab process?
Yeah, look, I think, there's high scrutiny in AFL especially. So, your objective data is pretty easy to come by. It's abundant. There's lots of it. I probably lean more towards the subjective stuff, those discussions you have with the athlete, with other practitioners, those sorts of things. Just that mud mapping of ideas, I think, is really important. And that's the stuff I lean on probably more so. So, a player does a running session, I always sort of write, it might just be a 1 or 2 lines at the end of their session. It's just like, horrible day, felt rubbish, knee felt crap, moody, didn't sleep well, or conversely, smashed it out of the park, let's progress next session, blah, blah, blah. And I think that's probably where you get your bigger sort of nuggets. Is just 1 or 2 lines, just some because it's a moving feast, so to speak, and I tend to lean on that a little bit, even just some of those incidental, cues that you pick up in discussions with athletes. Like an example being, player might have a young family, not sleeping well, and I know you've been there, I've been there. And so, just those little things that are going to impact on the day to day and how things will take shape. I think it is really important, and you can marry that up with as much objective data as you like, but ultimately, if you don't have that core understanding of where the athlete is at, then you're probably not going to make as efficient inroads in their rehab sort of process. So that's my big thing is just little snippets of subjective stuff ongoing. So
yeah, no, thanks for sharing. That's great because anyone at any level can start practicing that, which is an awesome takeaway for practitioners listening in. And it sounds like you also use that retrospectively with years in the future. What about like on a weekly point of view, when you said you're diligent with your planning, because you've written that down, do you feel like you just sort of memorize that by writing anyway, like in the short period of time, or do you look back when you're on a Sunday maybe and look back at the week, 1 to 2 sentences just to get that context before you do your next training block?
Yeah. I mean, it's always a reflective process. And then I'm also, I talk about planning, but I'm also never so rigid in the plan. And that's probably one thing that has developed over the years is just that willingness to be able to change tack a little bit and even on the fly. I think one of the key things is if you've got the sort of cornerstones or the fundamentals of your session sort of locked away, and you've got a really good understanding of that, that's the sort of science bit. And then, it's how you deliver and how you sort of modify according to how the athlete's feeling or so forth, which is really the art or the craft of it. So I always like to feel like, I've got a good grasp of what the program looks like. But then I'm never so stubborn that I won't change because it's written down, if that makes sense. And I absolutely used to, I suppose in my early days, used to almost get stressed by the fact that, we weren't following things strictly, equal to that, GPS numbers and those sorts of things. It's like, I think you've got to have a sense of, this is a moving feast, and as long as you're getting your big ticket items across your rehab session, you still need to have some flexibility in that. So that's probably how it impacts mostly on planning, definitely.
Yeah, Lucas, one of the Lucas O'Daves, who's joining in live, has written in a couple of questions for you. Timmy's first one would be: do you ever lie to a player regarding the injury to change their mentality about it?
That's a great question. It's probably a loaded question. I think some of your messaging is really important. I don't think you ever actively lie, but you might paint a slightly more favourable version of the truth. Yeah. And I suppose at the end of the day, like if your intention is good and you're genuinely trying to do the best thing for the athlete, look, it may be you're sort of hosing down some anxieties or some fear avoidance behaviours, or even just a player's mindset. If you're trying to just nudge that, then I think you can craft versions of the truth. But I don't think you would ever blatantly lie to the athlete. And again, if your intent is to do the best by them, then I think that's probably a reasonable place for it. But yeah, great question.
Yeah, he's written another question. How often do players stick to the recovery plan 100%? It may be potentially rehab plan 100%, I imagine. Yeah, how often do players stick to the rehabilitation plan?
Yeah, it's a tricky one to answer. I suppose the main thing is it's never set in stone. I think whenever you map out a rehab plan, you always have a sort of asterisk as to your best case, worst case, and most realistic case scenario. And as I touched on earlier, there's no such thing as a perfect rehab by any stretch. But equal to that, you can have rehabs that exceed your expectations, and that's where you sort of need to lean on your sort of clinical experience and the experience of the high performance practitioners around you to bounce ideas. And it's like, can we push this? So probably in terms of putting a number to it, you'd hope that you get most of them around the ballpark, but But obviously, things happen, and guys progress or they even regress at certain points. I think one of the things that a lot of people lose sight of is, and it being in and around the industry, is that it is the pointy end of the industry. So there is an expectation to push the envelope at certain points, and it's not a risk-free environment either. And I think that's where your sort of communication with the athlete comes in, and laying out your pros and cons, and making sure the athlete has a good understanding, and the coaching staff and the other sort of high performance staff have a good understanding of, what are the risks and what are ultimately the rewards if you go down a certain path. So, I mean, very rarely do you get it sort of spot on to the day. That's for sure.
Yep. But we'll move to the more personal side, lighter side of the podcast, mate. Which movie or TV series has impacted you the most, and why?
That's a good question. Look, it's probably a bit cliche. One of my favourite TV shows is The Sopranos. So, I don't know. It's probably more like the dynamic of how that all works. That's probably one thing. Yeah.
And then favourite inspirational quote or life motto?
Probably one of the things that over the journey I've driven people mad with, and athletes primarily, is my quotes. Kevin Sheedy had one which I use, and I've even got on a little placard on my desk at the Adelaide Footy Club, which is, "The system is the solution." And I cop a lot of shit for that, and that probably points a little bit to my sort of need to have a system in place. So that's probably one. Good is the enemy of great. That's probably another. 80% of success is showing up. I don't know who said that, but I've heard that sort of slapped around, and then probably in a rehab sense, one that I've trotted out on more than one occasion is, journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. It's a bit corny to say it out loud, but that's rehab. You got to start somewhere, and that's the journey.
Yeah, awesome. Love those ones. What about in your work life? What are your pet peeves? What makes you angry?
Look, I think there's a couple of things. I think the first thing is and I'm not saying this because it's an issue at any point, but one of the things I struggle with is people who aren't willing to engage with each other in that sort of high performance medical space. They're not willing to embrace the transparency aspect of the business. So that's something that kind of annoys me. I don't like turf wars. I don't like, this sort of people working in silos. That frustrates me at a professional level. And then communication, I think, is pretty, again, it's so cliche, but it's pretty important. And people who don't or refuse to communicate sort of drive me a bit mad at various points.
Yeah. You mentioned knowing your one wood and your strengths. Is that your strength, is the ability to build a team and work collaboratively with different practitioners?
I've never actually thought about it as being a strength, but I think, getting the right people in the room and having the right conversations, I think is a strength of mine. And again, sort of honing in on that, developing relationship side of things, I think, is probably something I could sort of hang my hat on a little bit. Yeah, for sure.
Yep. And then what's your favourite way to spend your day off?
I've got a young family, so I've got a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, 2 girls, and they keep me busy enough. So it's probably more geared around family time. I've enjoyed a really nice off season this year, getting my weekends back and so forth. And just through October, we've had a couple of birthdays, and so it's probably some family time. And then, look, I'll probably, like most other guys, I like to hit the gym, or if I can, get out on a road bike and knock a few Ks over. But as you know, with a young family, that's sometimes easier said than done.
Yep. And in a COVID-free world, favourite holiday destination?
Oh, Well, it's interesting you touch on COVID. I mean, yeah, we loved London. I thought it was a fantastic city. Yeah, brilliant place. It seemed to be the hub of Europe for us. So I'd probably a little bit biased, and I'd um, say London. Yeah.
Yep. Oh, we'll start to wrap it up, mate. You're now head physio at Adelaide. You're back team. It's the A team with Burjo. What's in the pipeline for 2022, and what's the rest of the year look like for you?
Yeah, look, touch wood, it's not a COVID interrupted year. I think a lot of people across the industry and, at every level, be it sort of community, just, semi-professional to elite, have taken a bit of a hit in various ways. So that's probably the first thing, is that it is a COVID-free year and uninterrupted. That's my first wish. I suppose at a club level, we're a young squad. I think we'll go into the season being the youngest list again, having had a few older players leave at the end of last year. So that's going to present some challenges. There's certainly some good optimism and some good buzz about the place, and having finished the year off strongly. And then I suppose, yeah, having Burjo sort of at the club will be really positive, I think, in terms of just driving some cultural change and pushing the envelope and really putting a high performance lens on the total program. Yeah, which, not to say it wasn't there, but just having a point of difference and another voice. And yeah, I think it's going to be an exciting year, but equal to that, it's going to have its challenges, because it's a cutthroat industry, as you know.
Yeah, 100%. Well, thank you so much for sharing, mate, your journey and your story. You've lived a full life, and there's plenty more exciting things to come, no doubt. But thanks so much for sharing your time and energy tonight, mate. And really, I took a lot out of it, and I know the listeners of this podcast have as well. So thank you. Thanks for jumping on.
No problems. Thanks for having me, mate. It's really good. Great to chat.
Awesome. Thank you for listening, guys. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to hit the notification button on your Spotify to get a notification when we have a new episode. And our next live chat is with Cameron Falloon, the founder and joint CEO of Body Fit Training, on Thursday at 8:30 p.m. So I'll see you guys then. Cheers.